When Vice President JD Vance sat across from Governor Gavin Newsom, he didn't just dismantle a political career. He used the name of a desperate mother, Rachel Dervish, to expose a deadly 8-month secret. "Governor! Governor! I live here! That was my daughter's school." Rachel Dervish ran after Gavin Newsom's SUV through the ashes of Pacific Palisades. Newsom pretended his phone lost signal and closed the door. The whole country saw it. JD Vance saw it too. And when Vance sat across from Newsom 3 months later, he didn't open with $31 billion or French Laundry or any number the governor had heard before. He opened with Rachel's name. Then, he opened a folder containing a water infrastructure memo that Newsom's office received 18 months before the hydrants ran dry. A memo that said the reservoirs weren't enough, that the fire flow capacity was below minimum, that people would perish if the hills caught fire. The hills caught fire. The hydrants ran dry. 29 lives were lost. And the memo was in the governor's inbox the whole time. "Mr. Vice President, I am managing 40 million people through the worst natural disaster in Los Angeles history," Newsom began. 12,000 structures destroyed, 29 lives lost, billions in damage. I have been on the ground. I have deployed the National Guard. I have coordinated with FEMA, with CAL FIRE, with every local and federal agency that exists, and I am here, pulled from disaster management, to be questioned by a man who has never managed a crisis larger than a Senate office. Gavin Newsom sat at the witness table with the posture of a man who had survived 2 hearings, Trump's hammer and Vance's scalpel, and had been broken by both and rebuilt by neither. The polish was gone. Not repaired this time. Gone. The campaign hair was the same. The suit was the same. But the face beneath them had changed the face of a man who had been at -5 inches presidential polling for 60 days and had watched his political future burn with the same helplessness with which Pacific Palisades had watched its homes burn. "With respect, Mr. Vice President, I'm fighting a fire. You're holding a hearing." The man fighting a fire had, during that fire, pretended his phone lost signal to avoid speaking with a mother whose daughter's school had just burned down, while the hydrants that were supposed to protect her neighborhood had run dry 18 months after his office received a memo saying they would. Vice President JD Vance sat at the far end of the dais in a dark suit, no tie. His folder sat on the desk, thin, tabbed. He had not spoken during Newsom's opening statement. His face carried the expression, it always carried the expression of a man who has done the reading. "Governor, I want to start with a name." He did not open the folder. "Not yet. Rachel Dervish. Do you know who she is?" Rachel Dervish is a mother in Pacific Palisades. She has a daughter. Her daughter attended a school on Marquez Avenue, a school that Rachel drove her to every morning for 3 years. On the 9th of January 2025, that school burned. Rachel's neighborhood burned. Her home burned. Everything she had built in Pacific Palisades, the home, the school route, the neighbors, the life turned to ash in 4 hours. Vance was not reading from the folder. He was speaking from memory, the Middletown Register, the voice he used when he was remembering a person, not presenting a document. Rachel went to the site, her neighborhood, the ashes. And she found you there, Governor. Your motorcade, your cameras, your advance team, your security detail. You were walking through the rubble of her neighborhood, her street, her daughter's school for the cameras. She ran after your SUV. She screamed, "Governor! Governor! I live here! Governor, that was my daughter's school. You pretended your phone lost signal. You closed the door. You drove away." Newsom's jaw, not the campaign jaw, not the debate jaw, But the jaw of a man who has watched this clip replayed on every network for 3 months tightened. The tightening was not composure, it was memory. The body remembering the moment, the SUV, the ashes, the woman's voice, the door closing. Sky News filmed it. The clip has been viewed 60 million times. 60 million people watched a mother run through the ashes of her daughter's school after a governor who couldn't find the time to stop. He opened the folder. But I didn't come here to talk about the clip, Governor. I came here to talk about why the ashes were there in the first place. The committee obtained, through a public records request to the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, an internal infrastructure assessment dated June 20231, 8 months before the Palisades fire. He read current reservoir levels in the Santa Monica Mountain Service Zone are operating at approximately 62% of minimum fire flow capacity. In a multi-point fire suppression scenario involving hillside residential zones, current infrastructure is insufficient to maintain adequate hydrant pressure for sustained operations exceeding 4 hours. Newsom's right hand moved to the table edge, not gripping, pressing the slow compression of fingers against wood that begins when a body decides it needs an anchor and the table is the only thing available, insufficient to maintain adequate hydrant pressure. That's what the assessment said 18 months before the hydrants ran dry, 18 months before firefighters arrived at Pacific Palisades and found hydrants that produced nothing. He turned the page. The assessment was forwarded to the Governor's Office of Emergency Services on the 14th of July, 2023. The committee confirmed receipt through email metadata. Your office received it, Governor, and the committee asked a simple question. What action was taken in response to the assessment? He set the document down. The answer is none. No emergency reservoir replenishment, no temporary water storage deployment, no infrastructure upgrade authorization, no communication to local fire departments about reduced hydrant capacity, nothing. 18 months. The memo sat in your system for 18 months, and when the Santa Ana winds hit, and the Palisades burned, and the firefighters turned the hydrants, and nothing came out, the memo was still sitting there, unacted on. And the committee examined something else about the day you visited the Palisades site, Governor. Because the Rachel Dervish moment didn't happen by accident, it happened by schedule. He pulled a second document, a committee-obtained copy of the advance team briefing for Newsom's January 10th Palisades visit. Your advance team was briefed the morning of your visit that displaced residents, including families who had lost homes within the previous 24 hours, were present at the Marquez Avenue site. The briefing document identifies approximately 15 to 20 displaced residents at the location and recommends, and I'm quoting, routing Governor through Eastern Access to maximize visual coverage while minimizing unscripted interactions. Minimizing unscripted interactions. Your team knew Rachel Dervish was there. Not by name, by category displaced residents, people whose homes had just burned, people who might have questions, people who might be emotional, people who might scream. Your team chose the route that would give you the camera angle without the conversation. They chose the photo op. Rachel Dervish wasn't on the schedule. She was in the category to be avoided. And when she refused to be avoided, when she ran through the ashes of her daughter's school toward your motorcade screaming, "Governor, I live here," you picked up your phone, pretended it lost signal, and closed the door of the SUV. Newsom's pressing fingers whitened at the knuckles. The grip was harder than the one in Story 1. Harder because this was not data about EDD fraud or homeless spending. This was data about a mother in ashes being categorized as an unscripted interaction to be minimized. Numbers about money feel like numbers. A woman being minimized feels like a person. Governor, minimizing unscripted interactions is what your team called it. In Middletown, we have a different word for driving away from a mother who is standing in the ashes of her daughter's school. We call it leaving. Rachel Dervish's daughter's school was in the zone covered by those reservoirs, Governor. The reservoirs that were at 62%. The hydrants that couldn't maintain pressure. Rachel's school burned because there wasn't enough water. And there wasn't enough water because the memo that said there wouldn't be enough water sat in your office for 18 months, and nobody did anything. He looked at Newsom in Middletown. When the fire department finds a hydrant that doesn't work, they fix it. They don't file a memo and wait 18 months. They fix it because people live near hydrants, and people matter more than process. Governor, you told America you increased the fire budget tenfold, $200 million before you took office, $2 billion now. That's your number, your website, your press release, 10 times larger. You said it on CNN. You said it at press conferences. You put it on a webpage called California Fire Facts. The committee's analysts looked at what the $2 billion actually bought. He pulled the budget breakdown. $2 billion in total fire-related spending. The committee categorized every dollar. Here is the breakdown, 82%. $1.64 billion went to fire suppression. Equipment, personnel, CAL FIRE staffing, helicopters, trucks, the machinery of fighting fires after they start. 7%, $140 million, went to administration, offices, overhead, the bureaucracy of fire management. 11%, $220 million, went to fire prevention, brush clearing, controlled burns, vegetation management, the work that stops fires before they start. He set the breakdown on the desk. Governor, for every dollar you spent on fire, 11 cents went to prevention. 11 cents to stopping the fire before it reaches Rachel Dervish's daughter's school. 82 cents to fighting it after it does. Newsom leaned toward his microphone. Mr. Vice President, the characterization of CAL FIRE's budget. Vance did not pause, continued at the same cadence, the same quiet. Newsom's sentence, traveling toward does not reflect the comprehensive approach to wildland fire management, lost its destination, and dissolved, the way all unfinished sentences dissolve in this series, not interrupted by volume, but denied space by persistence. The committee also examined controlled burn permits. Controlled burns prescribed fire are the single most effective fire prevention tool available. They reduce accumulated fuel. They create defensible space. They are the difference between a fire that burns brush and a fire that burns homes. In California, controlled burns require permits under the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. The committee found that the average wait time for a controlled burn permit is 14 months. 14 months to get permission to clear brush that takes 4 hours to burn. The Pacific Palisades area had not had a controlled burn in over 7 years. 7 years of accumulated brush. 7 years of fuel stacking on hillsides above homes, above schools, above Rachel Dervish's street. And when the Santa Ana winds hit 70 miles per hour, dry, hot, the conditions that every fire scientist in California warns about, every October, the fuel was there. 7 years of it waiting. The committee examined the specific permit history for the Palisades zone. 3 controlled burn applications were submitted between 2019 and 2023. The first was denied after a CEQA challenge by an environmental group citing habitat for the coastal California gnatcatcher. The second was delayed for 11 months, then withdrawn by the applicant after the burn season had passed. The third was approved in principle, but never executed, because the approval came in August, outside the safe burn window, and by the time the next burn window opened, the permit had expired and had to be resubmitted. 3 attempts. 7 years. 0 burns. And the brush? dry. 7 years of accumulated fuel sat on the hillside above Rachel Dervish Street, like a loaded weapon waiting for a match. The committee also obtained testimony from a CAL FIRE battalion chief, a man who has fought wildland fires in California for 23 years. I want to read what he told the committee. "We've been asking for prevention funding for as long as I've been in the service. We know what works. Controlled burns work. Brush clearing works. Defensible space works. We know how to prevent fires. We are not funded to prevent fires. We are funded to fight them after they start. And by the time they start in conditions like the Palisades, they cannot be fought. They can only be survived." He said they can only be survived. "Governor, the men and women you pay to fight fires are telling you they cannot fight the fires you are failing to prevent. They are asking for 11 cents more on the dollar. And they are being told that the environmental review process, the process designed to protect nature, will not allow them to clear the brush that kills people." Newsom's composure, whatever remained of it, after 2 previous hearings and 3 months of wildfire coverage, labored. The labor was visible in a specific location: his shoulders, the shoulders that had been back in the campaign configuration since the start of his political career. The shoulders of confidence, of the tallest man in the room, of the governor of the 5th largest economy, rolled forward. Not a slump, a withdrawal. The body of a man who is retreating from the front of the chair to the back of the chair because the front of the chair is where the data lands, and the back of the chair is 1 inch farther from the data. Governor, in Middletown, when a building is a fire hazard, the fire marshal condemns it. He doesn't wait 14 months for an environmental review. He doesn't file 3 applications over 7 years. He condemns it because people live next door, and people matter more than process. In your state, the environmental review process designed to protect nature prevented you from protecting people. 3 denied permits, 7 years of fuel, 29 dead, and the people who knew the firefighters, the battalion chiefs, the men and women who spend their lives on hillsides, they told you, they asked, they begged, and they received 11 cents on the dollar. In your state, a coastal California gnatcatcher has more protection than Rachel Dervish's daughter's school. Governor, I want to talk about what happened before the fire. Not during. Before. Because what happened before is worse than what happened during. Before the Palisades fire, before any spark, before any wind, 7 major insurance companies withdrew from California. State Farm stopped writing new homeowners policies. All states stopped. Farmers stopped. CSAA stopped. Others followed. These companies didn't leave because they don't care about California. Insurance companies don't have feelings, Governor. They have actuaries. And their actuaries looked at your state and concluded that the math didn't work. He pulled the committee's analysis. In 2023, your administration implemented rate control regulations that capped homeowners' insurance premiums. The regulations were designed to keep insurance affordable, but the regulations kept premiums below the actuarial cost of the risk. The committee's analysts retained an independent actuarial firm to examine the rate control structure. Their finding, under the 2023 regulations, the maximum allowable premium for a home in a high fire risk zone was approximately 60% of the actuarial fair premium, the premium that would allow an insurer to cover expected losses and remain solvent. Baffengelosher, Governor, you told insurance companies they could charge 60 cents for every dollar of risk. And when the math didn't work, when charging 60 cents to cover a dollar of risk meant losing money on every policy, the companies didn't negotiate. They didn't lobby. They didn't complain. They left. He looked at Newsom. And when they left, the homeowners they insured were not transferred to other companies. They were transferred to the FAIR plan, California's insurer of last resort, a plan with less coverage, higher deductibles, and no guarantee of solvency in a major disaster. When the Palisades fire hit, hundreds of thousands of homeowners in Los Angeles County were underinsured or uninsured, not because they chose to be, not because they couldn't afford premiums, because the companies that would have insured them had been driven out of your state by regulations that made California mathematically uninsurable. Newsom's neck changed color. The flush, the capillary warming above the collar, the tell that had appeared in the Trump hearing and the first Vance hearing, and was now appearing for the third time, returned. The body's most reliable tell is the one it cannot learn to suppress. The neck flushes because the autonomic nervous system has detected a threat and has increased blood flow to the skin surface, and the neck, unprotected by makeup, below the jaw, above the collar displays the threat response that the face has been trained to hide. Rachel Dervish's neighborhood, Pacific Palisades, before the fire, State Farm had been the dominant insurer. State Farm withdrew from California 11 months before the fire. 11 months. Rachel's neighbors who had been insured by State Farm scrambled. Some found new policies at higher rates. Some ended up on the FAIR plan. Some were simply uninsured when the fire came. Governor, Rachel Dervish didn't just lose her home. She lost her home in a state where the governor's insurance regulations had driven away the companies that would have helped her rebuild. I want to tell you about insurance in Middletown, Governor, because Middletown has floods, not wildfires. Floods. The Ohio River rises, basements fill, homes are damaged, and insurance companies insure those homes because the premiums reflect the risk. The premiums are high in flood zones. People complain about that, but the insurance is there. When the water comes, the check comes after. You tried to make insurance cheap by capping the price below the cost, and the result was no insurance at all. In Middletown, a family in a flood zone pays $3,000 a year for insurance they hate. In your state, a family in a fire zone pays nothing because no company will write the policy. And when the fire comes, there is no check. There is nothing. There is Rachel Dervish, standing in ashes with no insurer, no check, and no governor willing to stop the car. The committee's analysis identified the specific consequences of the insurance exodus for Palisades homeowners. He read from the analysis prior to State Farm's withdrawal, approximately 68% of Palisades homeowners carried full replacement cost coverage. After the withdrawal and the transition to FAIR Plan and alternative carriers, that number dropped to approximately 31%. More than half the neighborhood went from fully insured to underinsured or uninsured in 11 months. Governor, when you signed the rate control regulations, your office's own actuarial division, the people whose job is to check whether insurance math works, provided a memo estimating that the regulations would result in significant market contraction in high-risk zones. I'm reading from the memo. Significant market contraction. That's actuary language for the companies will leave. They left, and you signed the regulations anyway. You made California uninsurable. Then, California burned. That's not bad luck, Governor. That's a policy choice followed by a consequence. And the consequence is Rachel Dervish, underinsured, standing in ashes, screaming at an SUV. Vance's voice changed, lower, closer, the register that every audience in this series had learned to recognize, the register that precedes the question. Governor, I want to connect these things because they're not separate failures, they're the same failure. The water infrastructure memo your office was told in June 2023 that reservoir levels in the Palisades service zone were at 62% of minimum fire flow capacity. You didn't act. The fire prevention budget, 11 cents of every dollar. CEQA delays of 14 months, 7 years without a controlled burn in Palisades. You didn't clear the brush. The insurance exodus, 7 major companies left after your rate controls, made the math impossible. You didn't adjust the regulations, and when all 3 failures converged on January 9th, 2025, when the winds hit, and the brush caught, and the hydrants ran dry, and the homes burned, and the insurance wasn't there, you drove to the site with cameras, with a motorcade, and when a mother screamed your name from the ashes of her daughter's school, you pretended your phone lost signal. He paused, not for drama, but for the weight of what came next. Governor, the last time I sat across from you, I asked, did you choose this? You didn't answer, and I understand why. Did you choose is a question about intent. Intent is hard to prove. Intent requires evidence of what was in a person's mind, and minds are private. Today, I'm not asking about intent. I'm asking about priorities. The water memo was in your inbox. What were you doing instead of reading it? The fire prevention budget was 11 cents on the dollar. What was the other 89 cents more important for? The insurance companies were leaving. What was more important than keeping them? Rachel Dervish was standing in the ashes of her daughter's school, screaming your name. What was more important than stopping the car? He looked at Newsom, the Middletown look, the look of a man who grew up in a house where the adults were not functional and learned very young that the worst thing an adult can do to a child is not abuse. It is absence. It is the not being there, the not reading the memo, the not clearing the brush, the not stopping the car. Governor, let me tell you about a day in Middletown. I was 11 years old. My mother was using. I came home from school, and the house was cold. Not cool. Cold. The kind of cold that tells you the heat has been off for more than a day. I went to the thermostat. It was off. I went to the kitchen. There was a letter on the counter from the gas company. The letter said the bill was overdue. The letter had been there for 3 weeks. My mother had received it. She had not opened it. She had not called. She had not paid. She had done nothing. And the house was cold. Not because we couldn't afford the bill, my grandmother would have paid it. Not because the gas company was unreasonable, they would have arranged a payment plan. The house was cold because the letter sat on the counter for 3 weeks and nobody opened it. Governor, the water memo is the letter on the counter. The brush is the letter on the counter. The insurance exodus is the letter on the counter. They all sat there and nobody opened them, and now the house is not cold. The house is ash. Governor, what was more important? 6 seconds. 7. 8. 9. 10. 11. 12. 12 seconds. Newsom's faced the face that had survived. Trump's laughter and Vance's mechanism, and 2 years of wildfire coverage, and the Rachel Dervish clip playing 60 million times held. It held because Gavin Newsom's face has been holding since the day he entered politics. Holding is the one skill his face has never lost. But holding is not answering, and the question what was more important was not a question that holding could answer, because the question did not ask for a defense. It asked for a list. A list of things that were more important than reading a water memo, more important than clearing brush, more important than keeping insurers, more important than stopping a car. And the list, the real list, the honest list, was empty. Nothing was more important. The memo went unread, not because something else was more important, but because nothing was. And nothing. When 29 people are dead, and 12,000 structures are ash, and a mother is running through rubble screaming your name, nothing is the worst answer of all. Because I chose wrong means you were paying attention and made a mistake. Nothing was more important means you weren't paying attention. You just weren't there. The memo came, you didn't read it. The brush grew, You didn't clear it. The insurers left. You didn't notice. And Rachel ran after your car, and you didn't stop. Newsom's eyes, the eyes that had once projected the confidence of a man who believed he would be president, went to the desk, to the documents, the water assessment, the budget breakdown, the insurance analysis, the advanced team briefing with minimizing unscripted interactions. 4 documents. Each one a letter on a counter, each one received, filed, and left unopened. Each one a door that was closed when it should have been opened, the same door of the SUV that closed on Rachel Dervish. His right hand, which had been pressing against the table edge since Chapter 2, released. Not because the crisis had passed, because the hand had been pressing for 35 minutes, and the muscles had exhausted their capacity to press. The release was not voluntary. It was the body's equivalent of a circuit breaker, tripping, the automatic shutdown of a function that has been running beyond its designed duration. The hand went flat, not the controlled flat of composure, the flat of a hand that has stopped trying. Governor, I grew up in a house where the adults didn't read the mail, not because the mail was unimportant, because the adults were broken. The electric bill came. Nobody opened it. The phone bill came. Nobody opened it. And one day, the lights went off. And one day, the phone stopped working. And, as a child, I learned something that I carry with me to this day. The worst thing an adult can do is not the wrong thing. It's nothing. Because nothing is the thing that lets everything else happen. You did nothing with the water memo, nothing with the fire prevention budget, nothing with the insurance exodus, and when everything else happened, when the fires came and the hydrants dried and the homes burned and the people died, you drove to the ashes in a motorcade and pretended your phone didn't work. 29 people, Governor. 12,000 structures, billions in damage, a mother running after your car. What was more important? He closed the folder. Nothing was. And that's the answer. No further questions, Newsom responded. His response was 3 minutes and 22 seconds. It mentioned climate change. It mentioned the worst wind event in recorded Los Angeles history. It mentioned the deployment of the National Guard. It mentioned FEMA coordination. It mentioned Cal Fire's heroism. It mentioned the $2 billion fire budget. It mentioned that Rachel Dervish was a constituent he cared about, and that the moment at the SUV had been taken out of context. The response was the response of a man describing the fire. Vance had been describing the 18 months before the fire. And the 18 months before the fire, the unread memo, the 11 cents, the insurance exodus, the uncleared brush, were not mentioned in the response, because the response was about the disaster and the hearing was about the decisions that made the disaster inevitable. Vance did not react. He had closed the folder. He stood, buttoned his jacket, nodded to the chairman. He did not look at Newsom on his way out. Rachel Dervish's name was still on the desk. The first document Vance had mentioned, and the last thing the cameras focused on before the hearing ended. A name. Not a number, not a percentage, not a policy analysis, a name. A mother, a daughter, a school on Marquez Avenue that didn't exist anymore. The first clip to break was, "Governor, I live here." Vance reading Rachel Dervish's words while the Sky News footage played on split screen. The clip was 21 seconds long. It was shared 38 million times in the first 24 hours, the highest for any Vance hearing clip. The clip's power was not political. It was human. A mother running, a governor driving, and a vice president 3 months later, saying her name in a hearing room while the governor sat and listened. The second clip was 11 cents, the fire prevention budget breakdown. This clip traveled through firefighting communities, through Cal Fire union accounts, through the particular ecosystem of people who fight fires for a living and have spent decades begging for prevention funding. The clip was not shared as political content. It was shared as professional vindication. Firefighters had been saying for years that suppression funding without prevention funding was like buying ambulances without building guardrails. Kennedy's clip gave them the number 11 cents. The third clip was mathematically uninsurable. The insurance analysis. This clip traveled through the insurance industry, through homeowner advocacy groups, through the specific and growing community of Californians who had been dropped by their insurers and didn't understand why. The clip gave them the answer: 60% of actuarial fair premium. The governor made the math impossible. The companies left, the homeowners were exposed, and then the fire came. The fourth clip, the one that ended Newsom's career, was what was more important. 12 seconds of silence after a question that had no answer, because the honest answer was nothing. Nothing was more important. The memo went unread because nobody read it. The brush went uncleared because nobody cleared it. The insurers left because nobody fixed the math, and Rachel Dervish ran after a car because nobody stopped it. The 12 seconds of silence were the silence of a man sitting inside the word nothing, the word that, when applied to 29 deaths, is the heaviest word in the English language. The water infrastructure audit was mandated within 2 weeks. A joint federal-state review of every water system in California that serves fire suppression infrastructure. It was the first comprehensive audit in 30 years. The audit was triggered not by the fire itself, but by the memo, the June 2023 assessment that said the reservoirs were at 62%, and that sat in the governor's system for 18 months. The existence of the memo transformed the narrative from the fire, overwhelmed the system, to the system was known to be inadequate, and nobody fixed it. The California legislature passed the Palisades Fire Prevention Act on a bipartisan vote, exempting controlled burns in high fire risk zones from CEQA environmental review. The act reduced the permitting timeline for controlled burns from 14 months to 30 days. It was the most significant wildfire prevention reform in California history, and it was named after the fire that it was too late to prevent. Newsom signed the insurance reform bill he had blocked for 3 years, allowing risk-based pricing for homeowners' insurance in fire zones. The signing was the policy equivalent of an admission the rate controls had been wrong. The math had been wrong. The companies that left had been right to leave, and the homeowners who were uninsured when the fire came had been uninsured because of a policy the governor had defended until the ashes made the defense impossible. Newsom withdrew from 2028 presidential consideration within 60 days of the hearing. The withdrawal was framed as a decision to focus on rebuilding Los Angeles. The framing convinced no one. 2 Vance hearings and 1 Trump hearing. Mechanism, then consequences, then scale, had dismantled the presidential campaign that had been building for 30 years. The mechanism hearing said, "You chose this." The consequences hearing said, "People died because of what you chose." And the combination intent plus death was not a political problem. It was a disqualification. Rachel Dervish testified before Congress in a separate hearing 2 weeks later. Her testimony lasted 6 minutes. She described the morning of January 9th, the smell, the smoke, the drive to the school that was no longer there, the moment she saw Newsom's motorcade and ran, the moment the door closed. Her testimony was watched by more people than any congressional testimony in 2026. It was shared more than any clip from any of the 10 hearings in the series. Not because it was political, because it was a mother describing the morning her daughter's school burned and the governor who drove away. 6 minutes. No binder, no folder, no percentage, just a mother, just ashes, just a closed door. Vance gave no interviews. When a reporter caught him in the hallway, he stopped. Rachel Dervish. That's the only name that matters in this hearing. Not mine, not the governor's. Rachel's. He walked to the elevator. The memo was in his inbox. The brush was on the hillside. The insurers were gone. And Rachel was standing in the ashes. Everything else is paperwork. In Madisonville, Louisiana, Gerald Thibodeau stood behind the counter of the bait shop. The television was on. The Tuesday regular was at the counter. Boudreaux called, Gerald said. The customer waited. A man who doesn't fix the levee when the water's low doesn't get to blame the rain when the water's high. He bagged the shiners. The memo was the levee, the fire was the rain, and Rachel Dervish was the flood. The customer paid, left. The bell rang. In Middletown, Ohio, Crystal Atkins sat in the break room of the Brighter Days Recovery Center. The television was on. Donna was there. The coffee was cold. 2 Vance hearings about the same man, Crystal said. First one, did you choose this? Second one, what was more important? He didn't answer either. But the answers are different. She looked at the screen. 12 seconds of silence. Newsom's eyes on the documents. Did you choose this? That's about intent. Did you knowingly make the decision? That's a legal question. A prosecutor's question. And maybe the answer is complicated. Maybe he didn't choose to lose $31 billion. Maybe the system failed. Maybe the memo got buried. Maybe. But what was more important? That's not about intent. That's about priorities. What was more important than reading the water memo? Nothing. What was more important than clearing the brush? Nothing. What was more important than keeping the insurers? Nothing. What was more important than stopping the car? Nothing. She paused. And nothing, when 29 people are dead, is the worst answer there is. Because I chose wrong means you were paying attention and made a mistake. Nothing was more important means you weren't paying attention at all. You just weren't there. The memo came. You didn't read it. The brush grew. You didn't clear it. The insurers left. You didn't notice. And Rachel ran after your car, and you didn't stop. That's not corruption. That's not a scheme. That's not a trick. That's absence. And absence, when you're the governor of 40 million people, absence is the worst thing. She rinsed her cup, hot water, no soap, upside down on the rack. You know what I tell the people in the group room? I tell them the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. Being present, being there, showing up, reading the mail, opening the door, answering the phone. Newsom isn't an addict, but he has the same disease. The disease of not being there, not reading the memo, not clearing the brush, not stopping the car, not being present for the people who need him to be present. Rachel Dervish needed him to stop the car. He didn't. Not because something else was more important, because nothing was. She walked back to the group room. 8 people trying to stay alive. People who needed someone present. People who needed someone to stop the car. Crystal stopped. Every night, the television played on in the empty break room. What was more important, Governor? 12 seconds. Nothing. The screen cut to commercial. If you made it this far, you just watched a vice president say a mother's name in a hearing room, Rachel Dervish, and use that name to connect a water memo nobody read, a fire budget that spent 11 cents on prevention, an insurance exodus nobody stopped, and a governor who pretended his phone lost signal when a mother screamed his name from the ashes of her daughter's school. Smash that like button if JD Vance reminded you that the worst answer to what was more important is nothing. Subscribe for more stories where a name is more powerful than a number, and a memo is more damning than a scandal. Share this with everyone who has ever watched a leader drive away from the consequences of their own inaction. Comment below. What was your moment? Governor, I live here. The water memo at 62%. 11 cents on the dollar, 14 months for a controlled burn permit, mathematically uninsurable, the door closing on Rachel Dervish, or the 12 seconds of silence after what was more important? Turn on notifications because the water audit has been mandated, the Palisades Act has passed, the insurance reform has been signed, Rachel Dervish has testified, and Gavin Newsom, the man who was going to be president, has withdrawn from 2028. Because 2 hearings and 1 name proved that the worst thing a governor can do is nothing. He came with a speech about managing 40 million people. Vance came with a name. He said, "I'm fighting a fire." Vance said, "You had 18 months to prevent it." 1 memo, 11 cents, 60%, 18 months, 29 lives. 1 mother, 1 SUV, 1 closed door. What was more important, Governor? Nothing was. God bless Rachel Dervish and her daughter, and the school on Marquez Avenue. God bless the firefighters who turned the hydrants and found nothing. God bless the homeowners who were dropped by their insurers and didn't know why. God bless the CAL FIRE crews who spent 7 years begging for prevention funding and received 11 cents. God bless every American who has ever screamed a governor's name and watched the door close. The memo was in the inbox. The brush was on the hillside. The insurers were gone. And Rachel was standing in the ashes. Everything else is paperwork.